In today's United States, history is being weaponized, and much of the history being weaponized isn't history at all. It's just myths. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to a series of videos I want to start doing about American myths, American mythology, and trying to set the record straight. This seems really important to me because I see so many people, particularly politicians, pundits, etc., on the media, on social media, essentially getting American history terribly, terribly wrong. And so I wanted to make a series of videos in which I kind of talk about those myths, where they came from, and to a certain extent what the truth is. Now, you need to know, I was a history teacher for a long time, and none of the stuff I'm going to tell you is new. This isn't like earth-shattering research I've done. This is basic American history that is, or at least used to be taught. And it's not revisionist history. If anything, the myth is the revisionist history. Okay, the myth, which attempts to, sanitize the truth about American history, attempts to, create some kind of valedictory nature to American history, some kind of like exceptional nature to American history. Those myths are the revision. And an attempt to tell the truth about those really shouldn't be classified as revisionist history, even though all history is revisionist history. I won't go into all that. So the first myth I want to talk about today has to do with the founding of the American colonies, which become the United States of America. Now, some people refer to this as the founding of the United States of America, which, is inherently flawed thinking to begin with, because the 13 colonies certainly weren't started with the idea that they would become a one nation of any kind, whether it's a Christian nation or not. Additionally, before I go any further, let me make a couple of things clear. First of all, the English colonists who, the United States, here in our history, we consider the English colonists to be the colonists who founded the United States of America, were really late to the game in terms of colonial settlers. But also, importantly, which I'm sure you're all aware, there were vibrant or had been vibrant Native American indigenous peoples living in the Americas, all throughout the Americas and along the East Coast of what becomes the United States for centuries before any Europeans came to North America. And before the American colonists that we think of them as, the English American colonists, came to North America, ships from European countries had been stopping in North America to get water and supplies, etc., and they had already spread European diseases among indigenous populations along the East Coast, devastating those populations. Hopefully I'll remember to talk more about this in a minute, but it's that devastation which creates the instability among Native American peoples, among indigenous peoples, which European colonists are able to take advantage of. But in addition to that, there was a whole civilization of humanity living in the Americas long before any colonists came, and long before particularly the English colonists came, who, according to the myth, that created the United States or founded the United States on the principles of Christianity. Long before that was true, there were also lots of efforts by the Dutch, some successful, some not, to colonize the part of North America that becomes the 13 colonies. That this was not an original English idea, and as a matter of fact, some of those colonies, like New Amsterdam, which becomes New York, and others, were incredibly successful and profitable, and I hopefully will get back to that idea later too. So those are important things, I think, to keep in mind about this. It is true that the vast majority of the English colonists who came to the Americas and attempted, for whatever reason, to establish colonies or farms or whatever in what becomes the United States of America were in fact Christians. That doesn't mean that they came for religious purposes. Their religion was secondary for most of them to, the reasons why they came or the reasons why the colonies were founded. Now, there are exceptions to this. Important to remember that in the beginning, we're going to just talk about American colonies. In the beginning, there were 13 American colonies. These were founded over an incredibly long period of time, from 1607, well into the late early 1700s. So, over the course of a century, the 13 colonies are going to be founded. And there were some founded for specifically religious purposes. Okay, so among those founded for specific religious purposes were the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which eventually absorbs Plymouth, which I'll talk about much more later, and becomes just what we think of the state of Massachusetts. There's also Pennsylvania, a land grant colony where, the King of England owed money to William Penn, a noted Quaker, and paid him by giving him all this land in North America. That becomes Pennsylvania, which was founded on, Quaker ideas. The Massachusetts Bay Colony founded on Puritan religious ideas. There was also Maryland, another land grant colony given to one of the wealthiest Catholic kind of members of nobility in England. He established Maryland to be a colony for English Catholics to go and kind of reestablish Catholic-dominated feudal society in North America. There is Connecticut, which is essentially founded by people who moved south from Massachusetts Bay Colony. I'm going to go ahead and call that a religious colony. And then there's Rhode Island, which is founded by people who decided the Puritan government of Massachusetts Bay was wrong, and they wanted to found their own colony, and they called that colony Rhode Island. Some of that I will get back to later. So only 5 of the original 13 colonies were founded for specifically religious purposes, and some of those religious purposes were actually to kind of go against the religion of the dominant group. Which means, that we're looking at a minority of colonies that were founded for religious purposes, and they weren't all founded for the same religion. As a matter of fact, with the exception of Massachusetts and Connecticut, they were founded for different religions. Massachusetts, Connecticut, Puritan; Rhode Island, some different form of Puritanism; Pennsylvania, Quakerism, or the Friends Church; and then Maryland, Catholic. And so, to say that we're founded for religious purposes or founded based on Christianity, that then, if you accept that, then you have to deal with the idea of all these different religions existing. So, there is that part of that. So if it's a minority of American colonies that are founded for specifically religious purposes, why do we have this myth that the colonists came fleeing religious persecution and their purpose in founding the colonies was religious freedom? Well, part of the reason for that, and I think a large reason for that, is because the story of the Pilgrims who established the Plymouth colony in 1620 is just a lot better story to teach to kids than the story of the first successful English colony in North America, which was Jamestown. So I'm going to contrast those two really quickly and point something out about the timeline of what actually happens here. So 1607 is when the Jamestown colony was established in Virginia, along the coast of Virginia. It's established in a not particularly nice place, kind of swampy, lots of mosquitoes. There's going to be disease problems. And it was established essentially by people who came for all kinds of purposes. Were some of them coming for religious purposes? Okay. Were most of them coming for land and economic opportunity? Yes. Were some of them just adventurers who were looking to, hopefully find a lot of gold and take that gold and then go right back to England? Yes. But they came in 1607 and they founded the Jamestown colony, and that becomes the first, successful permanent English colony in North America. There had been some other attempts, Roanoke most famously, to do this before, but it is the Jamestown colonies that is first. Everything went wrong. The people didn't work together. They didn't have unified purposes. They irritated the Native American, the indigenous people living around them. And so by, 1608, 1609, John Smith shows up and kind of takes control. And he says, this is what we're going to do. And he has some armed men with him in that second group of colonists that comes. This is how we're going to do it. And he's able to make it work. Part of the way he was able to make it work was by essentially exploiting and taking advantage of indigenous peoples who at various times allied themselves with the English colonies at Jamestown, and at other times found themselves at war with them. So by 1609, we have kind of a stable colonial situation, though not perfectly so. In 1616, John Rolfe, yes, the guy who kidnapped, raped Pocahontas, took her back to England where she caught a disease and died. John Rolfe made a really important discovery, a really important advancement in making Virginia successful, or the Jamestown colony successful, which becomes Virginia in 1616 by finding a strain of tobacco that grew really well there. And all of a sudden, Virginia then has a product that it can export and can make money from. And that leads to more rapid colonization and development, so much so that by 1619, the Virginia colony has to have its own form of government, which is the Virginia House of Burgesses, which is formed in 1619. And then begins to govern itself. If you've read or know anything about the 1619 project, something else important happened in that year as well. And so that is the story of Virginia: exploitation, disunion, death. I forgot about cannibalism in the Jamestown colony. War, developing a product, tobacco, which is not necessarily a product we necessarily want to glamorize for kids. And so the Jamestown colony story is not as attractive as, I guess, what people made the story of the Plymouth colonists. So we know that the Plymouth colonists came to the United States, or came to the Americas, on board a ship called the Mayflower. Now, what most people don't know is that only half of the passengers on the Mayflower were actually Puritans coming for religious freedom. And really, the reason why those colonists were on board the Mayflower wasn't because they were being persecuted in the Netherlands where they had been living when they took ship, but because they didn't want their kids to grow up in a non-Puritan world and be infected with the Dutch ideas and things like that. That's why they came. But only about half of the colonists who came and settled the Plymouth colony were actually Puritans. The other half came for the same reason the Jamestown colonists came. And we know that there was this incredibly bad winter. The ship arrived late. By the way, the ship was established on the location of a Native American or an indigenous American village, which had been decimated by disease and abandoned. That's why they had the nice piece of land in which to establish a colony. But that first winter, about half of the Mayflower colonists died. When that happened, intermarriage between Puritans and non-Puritan families took place out of necessity. A family unit is much stronger, much more likely to be able to survive moving forward. And so we already get this kind of blunting of the Puritan idea with the Plymouth colony. Okay, that's actually kind of what happened. I won't get into the whole mythology surrounding Thanksgiving, and leave that aside. There are lots of videos about that. The real religious colony, the really first colony founded for religious purposes, was the Massachusetts Bay Colony, founded in 1630 by a group of Puritans, 900, who came over on 3 ships, and they were determined to create a society based on their religious ideas, which was Puritanism. They wanted to Winthrop said he wanted to create a shining city on a hill, a beacon for the whole rest of the world, about how to live and how, what God's message was and how Christians should live and what they should be like. That's really what happens then in 1630. Okay, that's really where we get the first religious colony. Notice that it's 23 years after the Jamestown colony was founded. 23 years later, Virginia is already making money at various times, hand over fist, off of tobacco, already importing large numbers of slaves. The tobacco economy has spread to Maryland, which causes, in a sense, the decline and collapse of Maryland's kind of Catholic government. And we begin to see all this happening before the Puritans even got here. And once the Puritans are here, it's important to understand that 2 things happen, both having to do with ideas of descent. Number one, I mentioned to you that Rhode Island is founded by Williams. I forgot his first name. I'm bad at first name. It's founded by Williams, who essentially decided to lead his followers away from the Massachusetts Bay Colony because he thought there should be a greater separation between church and state. I'm just using that phrase because it's the simplest one. And the reason he thought that was not because he wanted to protect the government from religion, but because he wanted to protect religion from government. What Williams saw was that having governing power and religious power in the hands of the same people was bad for the church. It made the church into a political organization, which he said it was not intended to do. So he moves to Rhode Island and creates this kind of tradition there of separation of church and state. He's a dissenter, but more importantly, and this is true for all the religious colonies, whether it's Maryland or Pennsylvania or Connecticut or Rhode Island or the Massachusetts Bay Colony, as those places were successful, and they were, as those places were successful, and people stopped dying by the hundreds every time it got cold, and there was an economic prospect, then those colonies attract floods of colonists who come. And those colonists who come after them are not coming for religious reasons. They are coming for economic reasons. And this, then, I think, is the real kind of hidden truth about the founding of the American colonies, which eventually become the United States. And that is that the religion of the American colonies by the late 1660s, keep in mind, I think the Salem witch trials take place in 1666, that the religion of the colonies by the 1660s, just maybe 1.5 generations, after their founding, that the religion of the colonies was trade and commerce and money and capitalism, dare I say, that what they wanted to do was to make money. And this is not something that was not known at the time the colonies were established. One of the things that a lot of people don't know is that the first two successful American colonies in North America that lasted were founded by essentially what today we would call corporations. At the time, they were called joint stock companies. These are companies that sold shares of stock in themselves, people invested, and then they would get a return on their investment. One of those was called the Virginia Company of London, and the other was called the Virginia Company of Plymouth. The Virginia Company of London established the Jamestown colony, and it recruited those first settlers, and it recruited groups of settlers after that to go to Jamestown. Why? To find a way to make money to pay the stockholders who had invested in the company, so that everybody would make money, that this system of capitalism, of stock ownership and making money, etc., was built into the system in Virginia. But what some people know that, but what a lot fewer people know is the same thing was true of Plymouth. The Plymouth colony, the Puritans, Thanksgiving, Pilgrims, the Plymouth colony was funded by the Virginia Company of Plymouth. And the Virginia Company of Plymouth, it was that recruited people to go and establish a colony in North America for economic purposes. That's why not all the Pilgrims, not all the people in Mayflower were Puritans. They were going for different reasons. And it really isn't until we get to the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630 that we have a colony founded specifically for religious purposes. And by the 1660s, 1670s, commerce had taken over for religious ideas. This, by the way, was already true in colonies like New York, which the English essentially just took from the Dutch during a war, which had been New Amsterdam, which was true also of Delaware and New Jersey, etc. That commerce and trade were the real religion upon which the American colonies were founded. I will make a video about that and capitalism later on. Anyway, look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.